of all Muslims. And the disagreements between these two groups continues to this day. I'm sure all of you have heard about the tension that exists between the Sunnis and the Shiites in Iraq. They're blowing up each other's mosques and all of that. I'm sure you've seen that on the news. Other sects in Islam include the ultra-conservative, legalistic, and often terrorism-friendly Wahhabi sect, to which Osama bin Laden belonged. Wahhabism began in the 18th century. It's kind of a new movement on the scene. It began under the teaching of a man by the name of Abd al-Wahhab. That's why it's called Wahhabism. He called on Muslims to return to the pure form of Islam as preached by the Prophet Muhammad. I don't know of any Muslims today who adhere to the Quran more passionately and take verses very literally than the people who belong to the Wahhabi sect. They are not a fringe, radical, unorthodox group within the Islamic community. They are very much passionate about adhering to the Quran. The movement known as the Nation of Islam was founded in or around 1930 by a man by the name of Wallace Dodd Fard in the United States, in Detroit, Michigan. It's now led by this man, Louis Farrakhan, and is actually considered heretical by Orthodox Muslims today, primarily because of their polytheistic views. Islam is a strict monotheistic religion. And so most Muslims today look at the Nation of Islam as kind of the way that we might look at the Mormon religion, something that is unorthodox and very much unchristian. They look at this group and they say, that's not true Islam. Now, what happened over the course of the 100 years following Muhammad's death in 632 still amazes historians to this day. Within the first century, within the first 100 years of Muhammad's death, Muslim armies spread the Islamic empire up and into Central Asia, into the confines of China, across North Africa, and all the way to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean in southern France and Spain. Here's a little bit closer up view of this map here on the screen. You can see those red arrows that take off from Medina, where Islam really got started. It started in Mecca, but it really got its roots down deep when it was in Medina. And you can see all of these military conquests in the areas that these Muslim armies spread the religion of Islam. Were it not for God using a man by the name of Charles Martel in 732 AD at a battle called the Battle of Tours in France, we might all be speaking Arabic and kneeling toward Mecca 5 times a day. Many of us here today have European ancestors and roots. If it wasn't for this successful battle, who knows if we would be here tonight. It was there in the city of Tours, France, in 732 AD that Charles Martel, a ruler of the Franks, which was a tribe of Germany at the time, he defeated the advancing Muslim armies and ended their advance into Europe. Many historians believe that if it were not for that successful battle, all of Europe may have fallen to Islam. Islam spread far and wide, as you can see, but its growth happened much differently than the spread of Christianity. Christianity, as you know, spread over the first 3 centuries through the simple preaching of the gospel. Islam was forced upon tens of millions of people by military conquest, jihad. It's an undeniable fact of history that Islam spread by the sword. Now, a skeptic might say, well, Charlie, hold on a sec. What about the Crusades? What about the Crusades of 1,000 years ago? Christians are guilty of using violence to spread their religion also, right? Perhaps that question was on some of your minds. We're going to answer that question when we get to the end of our study tonight. Just want to let you know I hadn't overlooked that particular question. Now, not only did Islam spread by the sword, Islam maintains itself in countries today like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Sudan, Pakistan, Mauritania, Yemen, and Qatar, just to name a few. by threatening death for males or life imprisonment for females for any Muslim who would convert to another religion. That is the law on the books in more than 20 Islamically controlled countries today. If you convert to Christianity or Judaism or some other religion, if you're a male, you can be put to death. If you're a female, you can be thrown into prison for life. These countries are simply putting into place what Muhammad himself taught. These are words right off the lips of Muhammad. He said, quote, "If somebody, a Muslim, discards his religion, kill him." And not only do Muslims lose their lives for converting, but so often do those who seek to evangelize Muslims. If you go to Voice of the Martyrs website or Gospel for Asia's website, every week they're posting pictures like these on their website of Christians who have been thrown into jail for passing out tracts in Middle Eastern countries, or churches that have just been literally burnt to the ground by angry mobs of Muslims who are simply angry with these people because they're Christians. This too is based on the teachings of Muhammad. According to the Quran, people of other faiths who seek to evangelize Muslims, spreading mischief in the land, is how it's referred to as, are subject to one of four punishments. Listen to what Muhammad taught should be done to anyone who would spread mischief by spreading other religions in the land. Here's the punishments. Number 1, execution. Number 2, crucifixion. Number 3, the cutting off of hands and feet from opposite sides. Or number 4, exiling them from the land. He says that is their disgrace in this world, and a heavy punishment is theirs in the hereafter. Do you want to know why Muslims persecute our brothers and sisters in Indonesia and these different Muslim countries? It's because that's what Muhammad taught them to do. No Islamic republic or nation governed by Islamic law espouses religious liberty. Not one. There is not a single Islamic country in the world today where religious liberty exists. Now, countries like Egypt have a policy known as religious tolerance. They won't put you to death if you're a person of another faith, but they put all these other laws upon you. You can't fix up your church facility if it's wearing down. You can't do any evangelism on the streets, all of those kinds of things. Liberty of religion does not exist in any Muslim country today. Now, for months after the September 11th tragedy, we all heard and read numerous interviews, I'm sure, with Muslim scholars that were saying that Islam is a religion of peace. How many of you read the interviews, saw the television programs where people were saying, hey, Muslims were saying Islam is a religion of peace? And these Muslim scholars would quote verses from the Quran that did seem to say that violence and murder and terrorism were not part of Islam. Well, that was pretty confusing, I think, for a lot of people, because we would then hear other non-Muslim scholars who would say that the Quran does support violence and murder. So what does the Quran teach? What does the Quran teach? Does it advocate violence or does it advocate peace? Now, I've already quoted you a couple of verses from Muslim sources. Only one of those so far I think was actually out of the Quran, though. What does the Quran? The Quran is the foundation of all of Islam. Let's just go back to the very source and solve the question. What does the Quran teach? Well, here's why it's so confusing. The Quran actually advocates both. The earlier teachings of Muhammad, known as the Meccan surahs, when Muhammad was part of a religious minority, when he was one of the persons who was being persecuted, his teachings at that point in history have a moderate tone of peace and tolerance toward other religions. Listen to what the Quran says. These are the 3 verses in the Quran that do seem to advocate peace towards people of other faiths. Surah basically means chapter. Okay, so Surah 2, verse 190. Muhammad said, "Fight in the way of Allah against those who fight against you." It's okay to fight, but notice what the rest of the verse says, "But begin not hostilities. Lo, Allah loveth not aggressors. So it's okay basically to defend yourself, but don't attack first. Don't be aggressive towards other people. Okay? So that's a verse that some Muslim scholars would point to. Here's another one, Surah 29:46. Says, dispute ye not with people of the book. Anywhere in the Quran where you see that phrase where it says people of the book, that's a way of referring to Jews and Christians. What book is he referring to? He's referring to the book of the Bible. So Muhammad says right there, he says, don't even argue, basically, to paraphrase what he says here. Don't even argue with the people, the Christians and the Jews. Let them exist, peacefully. Surah 2, verse 256 says, let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. End quote. So basically, to paraphrase, he's saying, hey, don't try to compel people to convert to Islam. Well, you just share the truth. Truth stands out from error. People will just get it. Okay? So those Muslim scholars that were being interviewed on CNN and other stations, they would hold up these verses and say, look, Islam is a religion of peace. We do not advocate terrorism and the mistreatments of other people of different faiths. But in the later teachings of Muhammad, after he gained thousands of followers, after he gained political power and had a large army at his disposal, Muhammad began to contradict himself by advocating a much more hostile attitude toward people of other faiths. For instance, listen to these verses straight out of the Quran. Surah 9, verse 5 says, so when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captives, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Then, if they repent and keep up prayer and pay the poor rate, this tax that they imposed on people of other religions, if they do all of that, then leave their way free to them. Slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Who was an idolater? Someone who did not adhere to the religion of Islam. Slay them, he tells his followers. Here's another verse straight out of the Quran. Surah 8, verse 39 says, make war on them until idolatry shall cease and God's religion shall reign supreme. That verse right there is one of the verses that Osama bin Laden and those who head up the Al-Qaeda organization and Hamas and the Fatah organization, these terrorist groups, still quote. This is not an outdated text. This verse is still in a modern-day translation of the Quran that you can buy at Barnes & Noble. Chapter 8, verse 39, make war on them until idolatry shall cease and God's religion, in other words, Islam, do this until Islam shall reign supreme. Here's one more verse. Surah 9, verse 29 says, fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, even if they are people of the book, until they pay the tax and they are in a state of subjection. Fight those who believe not in Allah until they are in subjection. It doesn't get much clearer than that. And there's others. That's just a handful. So, it's kind of up to each individual Muslim to decide which verses he or she wants his or her own personal beliefs to be based upon. If a Muslim wants to live in peace with his or her neighbors and happily coexist with others, then he or she can find 3 or 4 verses in the Quran that support that. But if a Muslim wants to hate people of other faiths, including people of the book, Jews and Christians, and wants to spread Islam around the world at any cost, even with violence, then he or she can find ample justification in the Quran to support that kind of a belief. That's the truth of the matter. What book do you guys think these Muslim terrorists are holding in their hands as they march off to go kill people? That's not the Da Vinci Code. Okay? Those are Arabic copies of the Quran. Someone emailed me some photos recently there was a march sometime within the last year or so in the streets of London. The Muslims were so upset that someone had drawn a cartoon of Muhammad that they considered blasphemous. And so what did they do? They marched through the streets of London. Now I want you to look at these photos and notice the signs that they are holding in their hands as they march through the streets of downtown London. Slay those who insult Islam. Behead those who insult Islam. Butcher those who mock Islam. Exterminate those who slander Islam. Massacre those who insult Islam. Be prepared for the real Holocaust. And so on. To say that Islam is a peaceful religion that does not advocate violence is absolutely incorrect. Such a statement contradicts the Quran itself. It may be politically expedient for our president to say that Islam is a religion of peace, but it goes against the facts. Now, having said that, it's important that I remind you that most of the Muslims you will meet in the United States are peaceful, very kind people who make great neighbors. In fact, many of them are the descendants of parents who came to America to enjoy the freedoms that we have. They're here, they're peace-loving people. So don't take what I've just covered here in trying to straighten out the facts about the Islamic religion. Don't allow that to poison your mind toward that Muslim person who lives in your neighborhood or whom you work with. That's the exact opposite result we're hoping to create here tonight. I hope that you leave here with more compassion and love to reach out to these people who have been deceived. All right, so that's a little bit about the origin and the development of Islam. Secondly, tonight we want to consider some Islamic beliefs and practices. To become a Muslim, one must confess aloud and publicly the following words. Quote, "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad."